Yesterday was the most controversial topic imaginable. We had screaming arguments apparently in other rooms over it, and people engaged here about it. And then last night, I hope we're not live, but if we are, we're not going to say anything that we shouldn't say. But last night, a bunch of analysts were sitting around. I was with them, and they started again. So this is current. Are we live, or are we going to go there soon? We are. Okay. So what was I just talking about? Again, if you're joining us, no matter where you are, thanks again. Top of the hour. What is it? Noon here in New York. I'm Roger Struckoff, conference chair. We've had a very stimulating day and a half, and we're getting now to some really great stuff as we're kind of coming around the bend for the final turn. Blockchain is the topic I was talking about. It was insane. And so let's inject some more insanity. Thanks again for everyone who's attending, and thanks for watching. We have John Bates, Director of Product Management at Adobe Analytics Cloud, and he's going to tell you that blockchain is not solving real problems. John.
All right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with all of you here today. My name is John Bates. I'm, like it was mentioned earlier, I'm Director of Product Management at Adobe, responsible for all of our AI, machine learning, as well as data privacy capabilities within Adobe Analytics. I've been with that company, came from the Omniture acquisition, if any of you are familiar with Omniture and web analytics. Came through that acquisition 9 years ago, but I've been with that company for about 11 years. My background is in statistics and machine learning. So that's a little bit about me. The beginning of my presentation is probably going to be the least controversial, which is just an introduction to Adobe. Some of you may be wondering, what is Adobe? I'm sure you've heard of PDF. I'm sure you've heard of Photoshop. But what is this analytics stuff and the Experience Cloud? And so I'll dive a little bit into that, give you a little bit of introduction to the company itself and what we do. And then the very controversial topic of blockchain. And it not solving real problems. And I'll talk a little bit about identifying legitimate potential use cases for leveraging that technology to solve real problems. So a little bit of an overview of Adobe. Adobe is all about changing the world through digital experiences. The big game that you may be streaming on your phone, any sort of interactive online advertisement or ad campaign that you see, a smartphone app that keeps you on top of the demands at work and at home. These are all digital experiences, and powerful experiences are the way that we think, the way that we interact, entertain, work, and relate to each other in this world. And so at Adobe, we are changing really the world through these digital experiences. And experiences, they matter more than ever. Digital technology is changing our lives at a faster rate than we've ever seen before. And our devices are getting smarter and more indispensable. And so Adobe embraces this as we see new landscapes for technology. We help through the entire process from design all the way through to measurement and ultimately content and the experiences that are created with brands. Only Adobe gives people everything that they need, like I said, from design to delivering exceptional digital experiences. And winning experiences can take many different forms across many different devices. Our strategy is really focused on two elements, if you think about it. One is empowering people to create and to create those meaningful experiences, and then secondly, transforming how businesses compete. As a result of the way that you create those experiences, you can then compete on experience with the brands that may be within your sector or your industry. We're constantly looking ahead at new kinds of content that people can create to ensure that they have the best tools to create the rich, immersive experiences available across all devices. And so really, if I break those two elements of our strategy down into sort of the pillars that we align with, the first around empowering people to create. Every story, every surface. This is really, content can be delivered everywhere, whether it's a watch, a gas pump, an airplane seat, whatever it might be. Now with AR and VR, experiences will appear in 3D sort of floating in front of you, and this is something that we've really embraced. Second is creativity unleashed. Creators should not be sort of tethered to a mouse and a computer. So we've innovated through voice, touch, 3D capabilities, and collaboration to allow creatives to work how they want to. And then lastly, harnessing the collective IQ. We leverage Adobe Sensei, which is our artificial intelligence and machine learning framework across all three of our clouds, to learn and then help creatives be able to go take a task that might have taken 3 hours to be able to do that in 3 seconds. And then the second aspect of this is transforming how businesses compete. People buy experiences, not products. Businesses need to have a service mindset. It's not just about the end product that they're purchasing, it's about every moment that they're having between that brand and that experience. And each one of those moments is influencing whether or not that person is going to remain loyal. We put art and science to work. I'm in the very sort of analytical side of Adobe, not the sort of creative side. However, we collaborate quite extensively to bridge those two areas and really providing, and we do that by providing great content, which is key to all of this. And then finally, we architect for action. We've made numerous acquisitions. You may be familiar with some of the more recent acquisitions that Adobe has made with Magento around e-commerce, B2B or SMB type e-commerce and enterprise e-commerce. And then finally, a recent acquisition that we just announced, which is Marketo for B2B campaigns and account management. So we leverage our AI capabilities there as well. 1 second. Looks like we're having a slight issue here. Things kind of froze up. Sorry about that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead. Sorry about that small technical glitch. So, looks like we're back. Adobe solutions are broken up into 3 basic clouds. One is the Adobe Creative Cloud. Second is the Document Cloud, which has like Acrobat, PDF. And then third is the Experience Cloud. And all of the intelligence underpinnings for all of this is in something that we call Adobe Sensei, which is really our artificial intelligence and machine learning framework that we leverage. And so when you think about Adobe, hopefully you think about making it really an experience. And so that's enough about Adobe. That's what we do. Now let's get into the more controversial topic of blockchain. So the way that I think about blockchain technology, it comes down to disruptions that decentralize. There are very, very similar to past sort of disruptions that we've seen. There are a lot of bad examples of blockchain technology being used for use cases that really aren't relevant for that technology to be used. A lot of the hype is being applied to this technology. And so I want to make sure to level set that on that particular point that most of the applications and use cases that I currently see in the marketplace for this technology are really not very warranted. However, there are a few use cases that I have seen where I do believe that there is an application of that technology to solving a specific problem. And so to build up to that, let's talk about these disruptions that decentralize. So if you think about the digital age, exploded with the PC, which decentralized really processing power, taking it from the realms of big companies and government and putting it into the hands of the consumer so that anyone with a PC could now use processing power to solve a problem or perform a complicated task. And so you can think of different industries that have been disrupted as a result of the decentralization of the PC, from everything from publishing to typewriting to movies and many other industries and areas. The next sort of disruption of decentralization occurred with the information age. The internet gave us the information age and decentralizing really information so that anyone with a browser could ask almost any question and get an answer. Some of the answers not being as good as other answers, but you could get an answer. The internet disrupted virtually every industry and unleashed creativity at an unprecedented rate. And then finally, the trust age, and this is really where we're going into now as a result of privacy laws and initiatives like GDPR that we've seen in Europe, and other similar laws in Brazil, in India, some laws being evaluated in Australia and many other, in California. We're starting to see that trust, transparency is becoming increasingly important. And blockchain is a technology that has introduced us to this concept of decentralization applied to this concept of trust. Now, anyone can have access to a verified identity and ownership, foregoing the need to have a bank account or a government-issued identity. The possible disruptions and use cases, they're just starting to emerge, and it's pretty exciting to see how this might progress. It's very much this technology is very much in a nascent state, and so there's a lot that needs to happen either with this technology or on the horizon, whatever this might develop into, to really deliver against some of these use cases that are associated with the trust age. And so some of you may be familiar with Saturday Night Live's Jack Handey. Well, these are deep thoughts by John Bates. Some of the questions that I ask myself are, what if each of us could monetize the data that we create? Rather than having the likes of Google or Facebook or some of the other advertising networks monetize all the data that you create, what if you could take more direct ownership over that data and be able to transact it and even transact more of your PI in exchange for some type of value? What if consumers could directly verify their profile traits? Identity is a key part in all of this, and being able to make specific claims and have associated attestations against those claims. No one has really solved that very, very well. There's been a lot of centralized approaches to that, and other sort of federated type approaches. The concept of decentralization does introduce a world in which that may be possible, but there are challenges to getting there. What if we could virtually eliminate ad fraud from programmatic advertising? Right now, there's rampant ad fraud. In 2016, there was northwards of about $16 billion worth of ad fraud due to non-human traffic. What if verifiability around sort of the human nature, you as an individual, could be leveraged in order to verify that those ads are being served up to real humans? And then finally, within the world of Adobe, what if creatives could verify and enforce digital assets rights? This is really important for creatives. This gives them their incentive to create. If they can verify and enforce digital asset rights, so thinking of digital rights management, then it'll give them greater incentive to be able to transact. Now, things like blockchain, technology like blockchain is not going to solve all of these problems in and of itself. But there are specific aspects of this technology that we believe at Adobe could help to solve some aspects of these problems. In 2016, there was a book that was published, which was probably one of the first sort of business-oriented type non-technology applications or books associated with blockchain by Don and Alex Tapscott. And I really like sort of the way that they sort of position this technology in the world around us and some of the potential use cases that they see outside of the financial sector. One of the quotes that I do like from this book is they say, "The technology likely to have the greatest impact on the future of the world economy has arrived. And it's not self-driving cars, solar energy, or artificial intelligence. It's called a blockchain." And I kind of believe this. I kind of believe this for a couple of reasons. Whether or not it's the actual technology of blockchain that does this is less important to me than what it's introducing to the world. These concepts of decentralization these concepts of transparency and transactions, concepts of being able to take a person who may live in an economy in which they're not able to participate in the global economy as a result of the government regime that they have around them, and give them the ability to circumvent sort of those barriers to be able to participate in the global economy. So I think that this technology is introducing, at the very least, some important problems that we as a world need to evaluate, and I think that's going to lead to innovation and being able to solve those problems. Just very, very quickly, Gartner and Forrester have mentioned blockchain, and they're a little bit on the fence, I would say. I've spoken to both of them personally, the people who've made these quotes, but they are sort of teetering towards sort of the positive side here, which is from Gartner. They said, blockchain will lead to a reformation of whole industries and should not be ignored. They offer the potential for substantial change in technology development and delivery, as well as in how the economy, business, and society operates. And Forrester has said something similar. Blockchain's potential is undeniable. Blockchain technology, if implemented appropriately, and if I could magnify or put more focus on that particular phrase, I would. But if implemented appropriately, applied to the right use case, supports new business and trust models. It's still the early days, but let's not forget the internet was young once too. And we're seeing versions of pets.com from sort of the .com boom and bust being applied to blockchain today. Really not being applied to real use cases, solving real problems. And as a result of that, many of these companies that are just over-rotated towards the technology and less rotated towards the actual use cases, we will see them disappear within a few years, if not sooner. However, just like we learned from the .com boom and bust, there were certain companies that rose from the ashes, the likes of Google, the likes of Omniture, the company that I came from for web analytics, eBay, Amazon. Companies like that were also a part of that sort of .com explosion. But because they solved real world problems, we saw them not just survive, but thrive. And so blockchain isn't just about money. A few months ago, I co-presented with Graham Mosley from Microsoft, and he and I presented at a big conference called Adobe Summit in Las Vegas. And some of the content that you see here is associated with that particular presentation between Microsoft and Adobe. And one of the points that we made in that presentation is that blockchain is not just about money. There are other potential use cases for this technology, even beyond sort of the financial systems and financial use cases. So let's settle a little bit on what is blockchain at a very, very high level, and then we're going to dive into how I evaluate legitimate versus illegitimate use cases, and then I'll give you a few examples, and then I'll talk a little bit to wrap this up I'll talk about some of the use cases that we're currently exploring at Adobe within our research labs. And so if you think about blockchain is a secure shared source of truth. And so data is stored in a ledger, there's a record of every transaction. Everyone in the network has an individual or identical copy of that record. And some of these aspects, by the way, are sort of evolving over time as different blockchains are coming about. But generally, the ledger can only be updated by network consensus, and information can't be altered or deleted without the knowledge of the whole network. Okay, so that's sort of the underpinnings of what blockchain technology is. Now, this concept of data is stored in a ledger. So you can store any type of representation or digitization of an asset, digital version of an asset in a blockchain, whether it represents sort of money, a type of money, or an asset like you see here, like a car, or even just a message. These are examples of different types of data that can be stored in the entire network. And in that network, or in the ledger, and the entire network has that shared sort of truth from the ledger. Now, getting back to sort of we talked a little bit about, it's shared, it's secure, and it's a distributed ledger. These are some of the key characteristics of blockchain technology that many of you are probably already familiar with. Secure, it uses cryptography to create transactions that are impervious to fraud and establishes a shared truth. This is probably one of the biggest areas where I see blockchain actually misused, has to do with the concept of cryptography. That if you want to have cryptographic signatures applied to different transactions, then you need blockchain. And oftentimes, given existing use cases, all you really need to solve one of those particular problems around security is just a centralized database and better encryption for that database. And so I see this particular aspect of blockchain being misused all the time for specific quote-unquote use cases. It's shared. So blockchain value is directly linked to the number of organizations or companies that participate in them. It's distributed. There are many replicas of the blockchain database. In fact, more replicas. There are more replicas there than the more that there are, then the more authenticated it becomes. And then finally, the ledger. The database is write once, so it's an immutable record of every transaction that occurs. Now, this creates a problem as we enter sort of a GDPR world. Many of you may be familiar with that around data privacy. The ability to sort of change history is important for some of these new privacy laws. And so just naturally, as a result of the technology and some of its characteristics today, the immutability, while viewed in some ways as a key characteristic of the ledger itself, it also becomes a challenge as you start to think about how you can apply this technology, given the right use case, in a data privacy world. But this is some numbers that Microsoft actually shared with me when I was presenting with them is, why does it matter for business? There's massive opportunity. If you think about anything that has shared business processes, there may be an opportunity to leverage blockchain technology above and beyond traditional technologies, given that is providing the right benefit, solving the right problem, and doing it significantly better than existing alternatives. For example, since 2009, there's been $280 billion in banking industry fines as a result, oftentimes, of just sort of bad accounting and record keeping. $300 billion saved in trust taxes for manufacturers per year in supply chains, and then 48 million illnesses from contaminated food in the U.S. Each year. And I'll actually go through a use case associated with contamination. So why isn't everyone building on the blockchain right now? Besides the fact that all the cryptocurrency world has just taken a nosedive, right? And people aren't talking about it nearly as much. And it's really unfortunate, to be honest with you, that the whole cryptocurrency thing is associated with this technology, because it does, in my mind, it doesn't apply the rights, it doesn't introduce sort of the right information to sort of the lay or naive person who may be interested in learning more about the technology. They're more interested in sort of the financial markets and speculation. But one of the main challenges of blockchain is that it wasn't built for the enterprise. This is the state of new technology. If you think about sort of your IT organization and the technology that you have, blockchain is like an island, right? And you're the mainland, all the technology that you're currently using. And to be able to leverage this technology in an enterprise world means building a very long bridge to that island. And those bridges don't currently exist generally. There are a number of companies that are, I think, doing a pretty interesting, pretty great job at being able to create those bridges. However, that's generally the case. So some of the challenges are, enterprise-grade ledgers. These ledgers were designed for public networks. And specifically applied to cryptocurrencies, and they lack the performance, confidentiality, and governance capabilities needed for commercial use. That's a pretty big problem, generally. The application of smart contracts. Smart contracts were not designed to leverage existing enterprise tools and skill sets. And then finally, just getting off the island means integration, and there are a number of challenges in integrating this technology of blockchain to existing IT infrastructure. And so let's say that you have identified a particular use case, and you've evaluated alternative methods for being able to solve those requirements associated with that use case, and you find that blockchain technology solves it some X% better than existing technologies, or solves it in a way that can't be solved by existing technologies. So how do you build with the blockchain? And I'm going to come back to sort of how you identify the use cases. I'm just going to go through sort of more of the IT-oriented decisions that need to be made as you think about blockchain technology. And so the first question that I ask myself is blockchain the right fit? And I know that seems a little bit basic, but it's the most important question. Is it the right fit? Oftentimes I see an individual within an enterprise going around shouting out blockchain, blockchain, blockchain for a particular use case, but it's not necessarily a use case that requires blockchain. It could be solved in different ways. And so blockchain supports really two goals. The first goal really has to do with efficiency. When there are multiple parties, for example, that are a part of some process, and these parties are not competitive in nature because of the lack of anonymity that actually exists with blockchain technology. You want to make sure they're not competitive in nature. And it's generally fairly linear and sort of the complexity and sort of the sequence of events between each individual party. Blockchain can provide added efficiency and reduce opacity in those processes. It also supports the other goal around just really transformation, helping to transform the ways that individuals and different organizations are able to interact and be able to do so in a trustless way. And that's where you see the rise of and I'll go into this a little bit more in a second here, of private versus public blockchains. Now, when I'm identifying a blockchain use case, I go through a series of questions that I ask myself, and some of you may be familiar with some of these questions. They're not something unique to this presentation. The first has to do with the database. Is there a need for a shared database of transactions? And if the case is yes, if you feel like you can't do it in a sort of a centralized database that's not shared, do you need multiple writers? Are there multiple writers to the shared database? Another question is absence of trust. Are the writers non-trusting? And will they accept as gospel truth as reported by another entity? And this is where I see a lot of use cases begin to fall down, that you can have an intermediary in many situations or a third party that can represent sort of gospel truth, and a blockchain is not necessarily needed. But sometimes that is the case. Disintermediation. Does the database require modification directly by each user? Is it acceptable for trusted intermediary to make changes? And then finally, transaction interaction. Does the database require direct interactions between the transactions? And so the way that I kind of go through my decision tree in my head when I'm looking at a particular use case is I answer these questions, and it helps me fall out into different areas. One is, can a traditional database technology meet your needs? If the answer is yes, then you don't need a blockchain. And you arrive at faster transaction speed generally. If the answer is no, does more than one participant need to be able to update the data? If the answer is no, then you arrive back at you don't need a blockchain. If the answer is yes, then I ask myself, okay, do you and all those updaters trust one another? If it's no, would all of the participants trust a third party? And if the answer is yes, you do not need blockchain. Going back to the previous question, if the answer is yes to do you and all of those updaters trust one another, the next question I ask myself is this database likely to be attacked or censored? Do you need redundant copies in multiple distributed computers? If it's no, again, you don't need a blockchain. And if it's yes, then we get another series of questions that arise from these two areas. If you can't trust a third party, and if you answer no, yes to that previous question. Does the data need to be kept private? If the answer is yes, then you might need a permission to private blockchain, and you're gonna lose transaction speed as a result of this. You're gonna kind of arrive at medium transaction speed. If the answer is no to that previous question, do you need to take control? Who can make changes to the blockchain software? The answer is yes, maybe a private or permissioned blockchain. If the answer is no, then you might need a public blockchain, but you will sacrifice speed for your transactions. And I still say might, because there still may be cases in which you still may not need it. And so what do you need to get started with blockchain? The first sort of decision that needs to be made is really around choosing a foundation that enables you. Use the technology that best meets your needs, whether it's a permissioned or public blockchain. Think about your existing technology stack. And then there are numerous types of blockchains. Are we talking about a smart contract? Are we talking about more of something that's not smart contract oriented, like a sort of Bitcoin or lightweight financial system type of use case? Deploy in the topology of your choice. And so as you begin to deploy, starting off with a single node, a single entity, and then starting to add multiple nodes until you eventually get multiple nodes of multiple parties participating in this transaction. I wouldn't try to go all the way to that. I would start with a single sort of a single virtual machine and building against that, and then start to expand from there. And then finally, scale without limits as your business changes. And so if you think about it, the first step that you really take here is around the initial development and testing. Enable your developers to get started. So a single node, one particular virtual machine. Then the next step is single member. Simulate production for multiple divisions within a single organization. Multiple nodes across a single region, for example. And then finally, multi-member collaboration, multi-member sort of expansion, collaborate between multiple divisions and organizations. This is now where you start to get into multiple nodes across multiple regions. And technologies that might be in participation in this conference today, I know this is something that Microsoft Azure Blockchain Services provides as well as others. So how do I connect to my existing infrastructure? This is an area that has received a lot of development, I'd say, over the last, it's come quite a ways over the last 12 months, to be honest with you. So to give you an example of a way in which it can connect with other aspects, this is an example from Microsoft, leveraging their Cocoa framework within the Azure and Azure Stack. But you can see right here that there are fully managed distributed ledgers. There's hosted compute, VMs, and then so choosing the right ledger that fits your need is sort of that first foundational choice, and that's part of sort of this ledger core. And then the middleware, as you're thinking about that, coordinate with the different tools that are relevant to the use case and infrastructure that you need to maintain. So whether it's identity, different enterprise integration, off-chain storage, and I can't stress that enough. Blockchain is not designed to store, nor would you ever want to store massive amounts of data and information, especially personally identifiable data. Secure off-chain transactions, and many others. And it kind of moves up until you connect into existing apps and workflows. Now remember, what are the barriers that you should expect along the way? One is really just, I think probably some of the conversations that have occurred here internally over the last 2 days. There's a division or different camps, right? People who there are no real use cases for blockchain. All you have to do is go to Hacker Noon, and there's one particular post that some of you may be familiar with from Medium on Hacker Noon that is very anti sort of blockchain. And then so it's really getting through to the real use cases first and foremost. And then finally, what I mentioned earlier, just bringing this slide back up, is again, recognize that it's gonna be hard. It was not built for the enterprise. There are significant advancements that are taking place today. And as you venture into this new territory, recognize sort of the trade-offs that you're making as you apply blockchain. So, how do we solve real problems using the blockchain? What are some of these real problems? Common applications that I see being explored today really fall into sort of these 6 different areas. Everything from currency, supply chain, file storage, digital rights management, DRM, advertising, digital voting. When I think about classes of legitimate use cases, I really summarize it into 4 areas. One has to do with lightweight financial systems. where you've got one or more scarce assets that are being transacted between different entities. You have two problems that need to be solved. One, this is where you see things like Bitcoin. This is where sort of blockchain was born, was around the double spend problem, ensuring that the same unit of the asset cannot be sent to more than one place. And then forgery. It must be impossible for anyone to create new units of the asset on a whim. Then, from there, you don't, even within a lightweight financial system, there is a downside to blockchain for this particular area of use case, and it has to do with sort of the security or transparency of it all. All the participants can see all of the transactions, and so it's unusable in situations in which confidentiality is critical to the use case that you're trying to serve. And so that's one particular thing to consider as you're evaluating that particular area or use case. But if you feel like there is lower cost, you need to solve it, and you need to reduce friction, then blockchains may provide an immediate benefit, and given that the loss of confidentiality is not a concern. Provenance tracking. This is another one, and I'll give a couple of examples here. Supply chains are rampant with corruption, with theft, with fraud, and really just inefficiency. And so tracking the origin and movement of high-value items across the supply chain, such as luxury goods, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and electronics, this is pretty important. And so typically where I see blockchain being leveraged, it has to be in sort of the application of a digital or tokenized asset or representation of the the bills of lading or letters of credit in that supply chain, and sort of following it at each interchange along that supply chain. The next area has to do with interorganizational record keeping. And these next two really, they don't have a token associated with them. The first two typically do. These next two don't. This is a use case or area where sort of you need an audit trail of critical communications between two or more organizations. I see a lot of this in healthcare and in the legal sectors. And there's no individual organization in the group that can be trusted with maintaining this archive of records, because falsified or deleted information would significantly damage the others. And that's where we start to see potential applications of blockchain technology. But this concept really isn't new. Permission shared ledgers for multiple stamping or multiple entities to collectively manage, a shared digital audit trail using timestamping and digital signatures and a type of consensus scheme has been around for decades, to be honest with you. But in this particular case, confidentiality isn't as much of an issue. The value that blockchain provides is in the disintermediation actual portion of this. So there's no additional entity must be created or trusted to maintain this record. And then finally, multi-party aggregation. It's very similar to interorganizational record keeping, that particular class of use case. But this involves multiple parties writing data to a collectively managed record. The motivation's a little bit different. It's really to overcome the infrastructural difficulty of combining information from a large number of separate sources. And so these problems can all be solved in some ways without blockchain, but there is some benefit that blockchain does provide for instance, as you scale across many different parties, or if trust isn't necessarily there and it can't be brokered by a third entity. I do want to make one particular point before I move on here, which is really when you think about, should you start to think about blockchain or distributed ledger technology, it's about shared control over data, not shared data. And also assured sort of multi-party processes, not automating business workflows. I want to make that distinction. We're not talking about automating business workflows. We're not talking about shared data. We're talking about shared control of data, and we're talking about assured multi-party entity processes. And so here's an example of a refrigeration use case. And I'll actually, for the sake of time, I'll actually move to a specific example with Coca-Cola that we've explored a little bit with them. So Coca-Cola produces syrup. They're a company that produces syrup, and we've thought about how smart contracts could be applied to the Coca-Cola use case. They have multiple parties that are trying to get that production of that syrup all the way through to their freestyle machine that exists within restaurants, for example. Well, something that's really important to them, for them and the FDA, as well as the other parties that are involved, has to do with quality assurance, ensuring that the syrup as well as the product makes it all the way through to the consumer, and that certain rules associated with temperature and humidity levels, things like that, are being maintained. And in the event that they're not maintained, that it's publicly available and it's auditable by all participating parties, including the FDA, with a node potentially deployed within their own ecosystem. And so this is one application of a smart contract being leveraged across multiple parts of an entire supply chain to make it all the way to the consumer, to be able to verify that particular product was not contaminated and it adhered to FDA regulations for consumable goods that Coca-Cola as well as the carriers and distributors must adhere to. And so to wrap up, my last 40 seconds, at Adobe, we think about blockchain technology in really three areas: identity, advertising, and experience. Trust is central to the digital economy. Again, we've seen this with GDPR and other data privacy laws. And some of the general areas of application that we explore with our research team across Document Cloud, Creative Cloud, and Experience Cloud fall into applications of smart contracts, identity, DRM, digital rights management, asset provenance, verified advertising, and data markets. But the concepts that blockchain introduces will be disruptive in a number of ways. And I've talked a lot about some of these different ways that it'll be disruptive. From privacy protection to building trust to eliminating the middlemen and between content creators and publishers. But there are a number of challenges with blockchain that we also see. And it's important that we as a company, we're leaning in to understand this technology for the use cases and industries that we serve. Network effects are critical. You have to have general adoption. Switch costs, transaction costs, moving away from proof of work and proof of stake for any blockchain technology. Immutability, again, I mentioned that earlier around GDPR and other data privacy laws, being able to adhere to the right to be forgotten and exercise a data subject's rights in that way. Performance, and then finally, regulation from governments. And so, to close up, the different areas that we are exploring applications fall into really these 6 different areas, from digital asset and rights management for secure attribution, provenance and licensing, to we're evaluating advertising supply chains and transparency, fraud detection, and process automation. In my particular area, within the Experience Cloud, we're looking at identity, thinking about decentralized registries, repudiation, and data portability. There are new data privacy laws that are requiring data portability for data subjects to be able to take sort of their asset, which is their identity, and be able to port that over between different companies or aspects of their identity, be able to permission sub-data to different entities. And so with that, blockchain is generally today not solving real-world problems. However, we do see real-world applications for this technology or the future of what this technology introduces being applied as part of the trust age. Thank you.
Thank you. We have to cut our live feed over to another area, so we can't